Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Triple N Media. I am Dr. NIK NIKAM from Houston, Texas. This is a COVID 19 World News Update, April 17, 2021. In this presentation, we are going to be talking about COVID 19 pandemic overview as of April 17, 2021. We're also going to talk about wave 3, 4, or whatever you want to call it. Then we're going to look at coronavirus variants and conclude with vaccines and their side effects. Where do we stand? So let us begin with the feature presentation. As of April 17, 2021, there have been 140 million cases of COVID reported all across the globe. That is close to the population of Russia, which is 145 million people. That gives you the magnitude of this COVID-19 pandemic all across the globe. More than 3 million people have died as a direct result of this COVID-19 pandemic in the world, and the number seems to be climbing. So much so, the daily new cases reported all across the globe is close to 830,000 per day, whereas the daily deaths are close to 13 to 14,000 per day across the globe. Now let's focus on the United States. As you can see, we had the first wave, which was in March and April. That was followed by a summer wave, which was the second wave. Then we had a third wave, mega wave, during the months of October, November, December, and January. And finally, at that time, it reached a peak of 300,000 new cases per day here in the United States. From there, we had a rapid decline in the number of new cases in the United States. It reached a level of close to like 50 to 60,000. But in the last 4 weeks or so, the numbers seem to be going up to almost 80,000 new cases per day. Even though the mortality in the United States has come down, nonetheless, this numbers creeping up, and particularly in certain states within the United States, is becoming a major concern. Michigan is leading the pack in terms of outburst of cases, whereas Michigan has reported like close to 10,000 new cases per day, followed by Florida, New York, and Pennsylvania. And surprisingly, Texas and California are showing low numbers, and we will look into that in a minute. Here is a case of Michigan chart, and here in March they had the first wave. This was followed by the second mega wave when they had close to 10,000 cases per day that peaked towards the end of November. Then it came down and it was below like 1,000 cases. But now we see this third wave, which is kind of overshadowing the second wave that was seen during the winter months. Now it is approaching almost 10,000 new cases per day. This has been a major concern in the state of Michigan. There has been numerous calls for a total lockdown of the state, which has not been done as of this date. And let us look at New York. Of course, New York was the headlines during the last 2020 March and April, when it reached like 10,000 new cases. And we remember the days when the entire city of New York was shut down for several weeks. This was followed by a huge mega wave again in November, December, and January. From there, it came down, but it never dropped below 5,000 cases, and now it is slowly creeping up in New York State also. A similar story in Florida. Florida, we had the first wave, then we had the second wave during the summer of 2020. Then it peaked again somewhere around January with 20,000 new cases per day. It had come down, but now it is climbing up to like 8,000 new cases per day. So that is almost like the fourth wave as far as Florida is concerned. Something that's been puzzling the experts in the medical field and epidemiology is the lack of response in the states like California and Texas to this sudden surge in the number of new cases that we saw in Michigan, New York, Florida. And here is a chart from California, which had a small wave here in March and April. Then it had a second wave during the summer. It had a third wave. And surprisingly, the numbers have continued to decline to less than 200 per day or 300 per day. And they haven't shown a spike, at least not so far. This is a similar case in Texas, where we had the first wave. Then in July and August, we had the second wave. Then towards the winter months, we had the third wave when it was close to 30,000 new cases. But right now, the number of new cases in Texas is below 3,000. So we are trying to understand why California and Texas have been spared compared to most other states that we talked about, like Michigan, New York, Florida. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is the population density. Like states like Michigan, New York, and especially Florida, when people flock to the beaches or flock to the meetings or to the clubs, that's where you see a sudden spike in the younger population, for that matter. That's maybe one of the reasons why we are seeing a high number of cases in these states. Whereas Texas and California, pretty large states, the population density is not as high as it is in New York, for that matter. Now let's shift gears and look at South America. Brazil has been hit pretty hard. It had a huge prolonged wave, we call it first wave here, from April all the way to the winter months. Then it is now going through a second wave, which is far exceeding the first wave it had to begin with. During the first wave, during the summer months, the counts were like 1,000 to 1,200. Now it is almost 3 times what it was during the months of July, August, and September. And along with that, the mortality is also creeping up. Now coming to Europe, there also we are seeing a third wave in France, Germany, Spain, and other states, including the United Kingdom. Here they had the first wave, the second wave, where they experienced almost 50, 60,000 new cases in France. Now those numbers are coming back in France during the month of April. Similar story in Germany, where the second wave had almost 30,000 new cases per day, and now these numbers are being exceeded in the month of April 2021 as we speak. The death rates have not gone up in proportion to the changes we have seen in new cases during the winter months. And I made a special video on this about the so-called case-demic. That is, the test that we are using is not really specific for viruses that can cause infection, viruses that can spread the infection to other people. It detects the virus remnants, and RNA fragments. As a result, we are seeing a lot of positive cases, but that doesn't necessarily translate into symptomatic COVID-19 patients or increased hospitalizations. But we are seeing increased hospitalization among the younger population who are trying to gather in large numbers despite all the efforts done and taken by the medical professionals. But this has forced Germany, France, and United Kingdom to bring lockdowns again for the second or maybe the third time to curb this sudden rise in the number of cases. Now let's talk about India. India is a totally different situation. India, as you know, has a population of 1.3 billion people, and it had a monolithic big wave during the September, October, November months, where it peaked, reached 100,000 new cases per day. Then it was coming down gradually, and everybody was feeling a sigh of relief, whereas in the last 6 weeks or so, things have just gotten totally out of control. Now India is experiencing as many as 230,000 new cases per day. What is driving this wave 3? We have to understand that wave 3 has been driven by multiple factors. People gathering in large numbers, population density, which of course doesn't change from time to time. Number 3, there are at least 3 new coronavirus variants circulating all across the globe, especially the UK variant, which is accounting for more than 50% of the cases here in the United States. Then we have the South African variant, which is more virulent, and of course the UK variant has a tendency to spread rapidly, and these are some of the factors, along with the younger population getting more restless and trying to gather in large numbers, leading to an increase or an uptick in the number of people who are coming to the hospital with younger age groups with the symptoms of COVID-19. So let's keep those things in mind. Now here is the death rate is also going up in India, and it has sort of exceeded the death rates seen, which were around like 1,200 during the big monolithic wave we saw in the summer months in India. Okay, I talked about new coronavirus variants. We have the UK variant, which is B117. Then we have the South African variant, which is B1351. This causes more severe illness, whereas UK variant spreads more easily in the population. Then we have the Brazil variant P1, which we don't have too many of those in the United States at this time. But nonetheless, as we see more and more variants, the spread of COVID becomes much more widespread, as most of the population will be vulnerable to these new coronavirus variants. Now we're going to focus on our third point for this evening, that is vaccines. What vaccines are available? How many people have received vaccines? And what about the side effects, which are drawing a lot more attention than the number of people who have been vaccinated? We have the Pfizer-BioNTech, should be BioNTech, excuse the spelling mistake here, which has a 94% efficacy. Then we have the Moderna, which is the similar 95% efficacy, and these two are the messenger RNA-based vaccines. Then we have Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, which are the adenovirus vector-based. They have like 72 or 62 to 90% efficacy. Then we have the Sputnik, the Russian, which is also adenovirus-based, has a 91.6%. There are several other vaccines that have been used in China, but they are not readily available outside China. Okay, if you look at the world population, which is more than 7.3 billion or so, the number of people who have received vaccines is a fraction of the world population, which tells you that a very large percentage, maybe 80-90% of the world population is still not having the vaccination. Of course, we have made some advances in terms of monoclonal antibodies like Regeneron, but these things are not readily available all across the globe. There was a lot of enthusiasm with serum plasma transfusion. Even that is not widely available. Okay, let's talk about the countries that have made some progress as far as the vaccines are concerned. Israel is the country that leads with more than 60% of its population having received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, whereas in the United Kingdom, 50% of the population has received at least one dose. And in fact, the British approach of at least getting one jab into the UK population has seemed to have worked out in reducing their number of cases in Europe compared to France and Germany. There were skepticisms about spacing the doses between the first and the second dose, but nonetheless, getting the first dose in a larger number of people in the UK has turned out to be a positive response, and that is reflected in the fact that they are not seeing a sudden surge that is seen in France and Germany. United States has done more than 200 million first dose injections, and the United States has now at least 40% of the population, or now it's close to 60% of the population, which has received at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine. And if you look at Germany, with a population of 83 million people, only about 10 to 15% of the people have received vaccination, and France is far behind Germany. That explains as why this virus is an opportunistic creature, and it can just spread widely as long as people are not vaccinated, as long as people don't have antibody protections. The population is going to be vulnerable. And this is just looking at, I talked about the world population is over 7 billion people, and when you look at United States, it's 200 million, China 200 million, India 120 million, and the rest all in single digits or so. When you add up all these numbers, we are talking about like 500 million people. I mean, that is compared to a world population of 7 billion people. That shows you that we have a long way to go in terms of getting the world population vaccinated. I don't know if you'll ever get to the herd immunity as far as the world population is concerned. In the United States, we are trying to understand as what is causing this disparity in various states like Michigan, New York, New Jersey, and Florida compared to Texas and California. If you look at the number of people, it's not the temperature, because California, Texas, and Florida have similar temperature variations. Whereas I think the population density is an important factor, and when people gather, there is more chance for spreading infection, especially if they had no antibodies or if they had no vaccines. So they are like virgin cases, they are going to be exposed. If you look at the number of people who have been vaccinated, is not much difference in Texas compared to Florida, Michigan, or New York. These numbers, the number of people, 37% receiving one dose, 22% receiving two doses, these numbers are identical, and still we see this disparity. I don't think we really understand why certain numbers are driving in certain parts of the world at a given certain time. But I don't think we are anywhere close to bringing this pandemic under control. This pandemic is still in its full rage, because more than 90% of the world population has not received the vaccination. And with these new coronavirus variants, we may be in for a pretty long period of containment to keep ourselves safe and protected. Here, as I said, in the United States, we have so far close to 200 million doses have been administered, of which about 22% of the population has received both doses. Combine that with another 10% of the population which had COVID infection in the United States, we are approaching close to 48, and maybe 30% of the people had no symptoms or never tested. We are close to like 50% of the population which has some sort of a protection here in the United States. Now let's shift gears and talk about the concerns that have been raised about the COVID vaccines and their side effects. AstraZeneca had this run of 30 plus cases of the cavernous venous sinus thrombosis, that is the blood clot formation in the veins inside the brain that led to symptoms and deaths. And the similar situation was found in Johnson & Johnson vaccine. They had 8 people who came down with these symptoms. One of them died, and the second person is in a critical situation. But whenever we see a sequence of patients having similar clinical presentations or side effects, the first thing the medical professionals and the experts need to do is study that particular disease. Instead of studying what is CVST, most of the experts are focused on bringing a relationship between the vaccine and the disease. But if we study the disease itself to begin with, the incidence of CVSD in the general population is 1 in a million, and it was no different from what was seen in Johnson & Johnson vaccine population. More than 6.8 million people had received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and they had 8 cases of this CVSD, or a blood clot formation in the veins. So I think it would be prudent on the medical experts to look at complications seriously, but at the same time see what is the natural incidence of these conditions, what is the natural population it affects, and how does it present, and how is it treated, so that we have a much broader understanding of these complications in the context of millions of people receiving the COVID vaccine. In fact, the cavernous venous sinus thrombosis is associated with headaches, blurred vision, fainting, sensory changes, confusion, and a whole host of things. Study the disease itself separately and then try to see if there's a correlation. And if there is a correlation, is it a particular age group, race, or ethnicity that is more vulnerable? And maybe streamline the exclusion criteria to the group of people who are most likely to get these complications, and then deal with the rest as it is appropriate. So ladies and gentlemen, so you have been watching Triple N Media. This is a COVID-19 pandemic 2021 update, April 17, 2021, wave 3, 4, whatever you want to call it, coronavirus variants, vaccines and side effects. This COVID-19 pandemic world news has been brought to you by Triple N Media from Houston, Texas, and we will see you next time.